This is the EWN Podcast Network.
Welcome to Late Boomers, our podcast guide to creating your third act with style, power, and impact. Hi, I'm Cathy Worthington.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Join us as we bring you conversations with successful entrepreneurs, entertainers, and people with vision who are making a difference in the world.
Everyone has a story, and we'll take you along for the ride on each interview, recounting the journey our guests have taken to get where they are, inspiring you to create your own path to success. Let's get started.
Hello, welcome to Late Boomers. I'm Cathy Worthington. We're thrilled to introduce you to Deborah Heiser, who specializes in midlife and aging, and she's going to talk about what we boomers have to look forward to as we age.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Deborah is an applied developmental psychologist and author of the Mentorship Edge. She's the founder and CEO of the Mentor Project and believes older people are precious natural resources, and we're built to be mentors and pass our skills and knowledge on to the next generation. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
We're excited to have you.
Yeah, you're perfect for our message. So please tell us about how your own life experiences led you to the path you're on today.
So I really never expected to grow up and become a psychologist. I didn't even know what that was. I'm a first-gen college goer, and I used to go down to visit my grandmother in Florida. I lived in New York, and one time I went down, and my grandmother was the coolest person on the planet. I never had to pack clothes. I would just pack shoes and go down and stay with her and wear her clothes. One year I got down and she was grouchy, unkempt, unhappy, and she just wasn't herself. And so I talked to somebody down there and said, there's something wrong with grandma. And they said, don't worry, we're going to fix her. She's taking a medication and it's making her depressed. And by the time you come back in a couple of months to visit her, she's going to be okay. And I didn't believe her. I didn't even know what depression was. I was like 20, maybe 19. And so I went home and I came back and grandma was back to herself. So much so that she had a boyfriend named Wilbur. So she was all better. And I said, that's it. I'm going to be a grandma fixer. And I went back and got a degree in psychology and decided to switch from working with, children to work with adults, and then embarked on a career in research, looking at everything no one ever wants to have or get. And that includes depression, frailty, Alzheimer's, all sorts of things. My first book was on, palliative care. So really, I was a conversation killer at any cocktail party. Someone wanted to chat with me. So,
yeah, I get that.
So what happened was I was really doing well with that and enjoying it. And somebody said to me at a party, dinner party, what do we have to look forward to as we age? And I was stumped. I was like, what are you talking about? I had been looking at everything that was negative, but that's an outlier.
I was very curious. What do we have to look forward to as we age?
Yeah.
Because the youngest boomers are now 60.
Exactly.
And and so tell us, what do we have to look forward to?
No one had looked at that. And so I hadn't either. I just kept thinking, well, we'll put a Band-Aid on all these terrible things. But I learned that those are all outliers. Depression, we shouldn't expect to be depressed. We shouldn't expect to be frail. We shouldn't expect to get Alzheimer's disease. These are things we shouldn't expect to have or get. So what I did was I went back to the research and I said, you know what? We've all been looking at aging from a physical trajectory that looks like an inverted V, like this, like an upside down triangle. And so we have a steep incline with our physical abilities, learn to walk and talk. And then, by our 20s, we're really at our peak. And then there's a slow, steady decline. And that's what everybody is scared of. They get scared of
Mhm.
reading glasses. I'm wearing them. I don't even care. Like these are the kinds of things that they say, oh my gosh, everything we have, we're going to lose. And what they don't realize is that, and I didn't either, is that there's an emotional trajectory that starts at the same time and it goes up and it never goes down.
Ah,
So you should expect to be happier as you get older. Just like I'm in my mid 50s and I tell all my students who are in their 20s, you can outrun me, but I'm happier than you. And that's really what we can expect.
Mm.
I'm not trying.
Isn't that interesting? I love that point of view.
yeah, I do too.
Yeah,
And part of it's what we're fed as we grow older
exactly.
and grow up.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all media and it's other things that are
Mhm.
out there that we're really having in our background in what we're watching and what we're seeing in film. And I remember in the early 2000s going to an Atlantic roundtable meeting, and Ellen Burstyn was sitting next to me, and she said, "We need to see more older women in film. There are plenty of
Mhm.
older men, but the people who are in the film are frail, or they're the grandmothers, or they're in a rocking chair." And then fortunately we started to see some changes, like Gracie and Frankie and Grace, I think it's called, and
Grace and Frankie.
Grace and
Yeah.
Frankie. And I loved that show, but we started to see a shift in women that started to come into film. And so we're starting to see a lot of change that's positive, where women are independent, having fun, they're sexy. And that's really what we should be expecting, is to be
Sexy
just as,
grandma.
why not?
Mhm.
Why shouldn't that be the way it is? It should be.
Yeah.
Well, tell us, what is generativity?
So generativity is right in the middle. If you look at our emotional development, emotional development starts with, where we have to trust our caregivers. We want to make sure that we can trust whoever's holding us when we're babies, that they don't drop us, that they feed us, that they give us everything that we need. And then from there, we embark out into more independence. And then we want to start to figure out who we are. And then we want to make close, intimate relationships. By the time we hit midlife, we know who we are. We've gathered the friends who we feel it's more quality than quantity. We have a close knit group of meaningful connections around us. And that's when we start to look around and say, okay, I've checked a lot of boxes. I've done all the things I'm supposed to do. I had a job. I, did all the things that I said I would set out to do. Now what? And that's when people will often say, uh-oh, what's next? I've done
Yeah.
it all. And that scares people. What people don't
Mm.
realize is that generativity kicks in at this very moment. And this is where we want to say, I have a footprint and mine matters. It's like that George Bailey from It's a Wonderful Life. He doesn't know
Yeah.
how much he mattered until he finds out. Well, we don't need to go through that in order to find out that we matter. Generativity is a time that if we can say, you know what? I care for others without expecting anything in return, which is the definition of generativity. I'm caring for others without expecting anything in return. I'm giving to people my expertise, my values, my culture, whatever it is, to someone else. They're going to carry it, and that's going to keep me relevant. It's going to make it
Mm.
so that I have purpose and meaning, and we get to see those footprints. So generativity is really volunteering, mentoring, and philanthropy. And we naturally do that stuff, but we very rarely give ourselves credit for doing that. And it's
That's
really,
true.
Mm.
creativity is something that we can say, hey, I just did this. It can be a grandma saying, hey, I passed down the family traditions. That's why we have our family traditions every year. It could be somebody passing down some work culture or value. It could be the biggest ones, though, are the traditions and the values and the culture. Most people don't value those very much. They think, I'm not a
Mm.
professional, I can't be a mentor, but they couldn't be farther from the truth. If you do any holiday or any tradition, or you look at religion, that has been passed down for centuries. No one has been like the great accountant who lived, like this is something that, everyone has the ability to mentor and to give back
Mm.
and to leave a legacy that is out there choosing.
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
It
Um,
does.
Tell us a little bit about how people can prepare for retirement and how they can adjust to not going to the office every day, or not having that paycheck come in, or having to deal with the illness.
So, really, if you're getting ready to retire, I like to tell people to prepare in advance. Now, most people don't, but if you can, to prepare in advance. And that is to say, look at yourself not as your identity card, which is what I've always called those business cards. People will say, I am a, and it's their job title. Well, you want to be more
Hmm.
than your job title. And we all are.
Hmm.
The things that people remember about us are not our job title. It's how we made people feel. It's how we passed on our values and our culture, right? And the meaningful things in our lives. So get in touch with what those are. Those are really our superpowers. So are you somebody that hosts the holidays? Are you somebody that everybody, when they come, they expect a certain feel? Are you somebody that makes sure that everybody is following a culture, with whether that's a religion or that's something in your family? Are you somebody who's putting out into the community some way that you think that it should be operating? Maybe you're joining the Rotary. Maybe you're getting involved in some meaningful way in your community that is going to shape that community or keep the culture of the community going the way that you like it. It's involving yourself outside of your job. And that is, if you haven't done that before, and you retire and you say, oh, which is what most people do, it's not too late. Just go do that. It's easy enough to find where
Oh,
you find joy.
oh, so all of that is the prep for the retirement,
Yeah.
all
Yes.
of what you're expressing. And
Yes.
it's a lot of things that we may have completely overlooked in our lives. We might be doing it, but in some cases we aren't even doing it yet.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a lot of people have to discover this after they retire.
What
But it would
happens
be
is,
better, yeah, better to think about it ahead of time, right?
yeah, because we don't give power to those things. And I look at
Oh,
life as, what's the power? The power is what has lasted for centuries. I want
Yeah.
to do that. That's where the power is. The power is never in, I'm going to continue with my job title. That gets lost in translation 100 years from now. What do you want that was your legacy to go on 100 years from now? Now, if you prep for that, you can be out in your community. You can be engaged in your, religious affiliations. If you're not religious, you can get engaged in your family culture. You can be saying, what do I want my future generations to look like? And if it's not your family and it's your nieces and nephews or whoever, who do I want to empower in and take on what I have? People get involved in organizations like foster care or other places where they are shaping the next generation. They mentor, they do other things, and that mentoring does not have to be in their career. It can be in other things that matter to a person. But we give the power oftentimes to what brought us the cash or the money. And really, the power that
hmm,
is everlasting for us is sharing our most precious natural resource with everyone, which is, our own personal gifts. We're not sharing that. We're burning down a library, is my personal opinion in terms of the loss of everything.
mm,
Yeah. And like you said, we don't give ourselves enough credit for the person that we are outside of our jobs or even outside of our families. And I think that's something, I don't know how that can be achieved. Perhaps you have some idea as to how to achieve that.
Yeah.
hmm,
So, I'm going to give you an example of some people who and I'm going to give you two different forms of, say, mentorship that a person could get involved in. But I remember meeting with someone and she said, I was just a teacher. Now I'm retired. And, what else is there for me? And I meet with my clients in their homes when I'm coaching them. And
Mm.
transition is the thing that I usually work with. And this person said, I don't have anything to give. And I entered her home and there were paintings everywhere. And I was like, what beautiful art you have here. And she said, oh, well, I do that in my spare time. I said, well,
Oh.
why don't you open a gallery? And she did. And her whole
oh,
trajectory changed. It was something she did in her spare time that no one saw but her and, maybe her family, but it was overlooked. And she never thought she
wow.
artist. She never identified as an artist. She identified as a teacher. But then in her,
Isn't that odd?
isn't it? But that's very
Like,
common.
it's so obvious, but it was so great that you could be there on site in order to point it out, because she wouldn't have told you about it
Yeah.
if you were
Yeah.
just talking on Zoom or something. Tell us about how older people get depressed, and how would you address that, and how can we combat it?
So, people can become depressed, and it can be pretty common for certain illnesses, diabetes, stroke, high blood pressure, certain things, especially if you're taking a medication. So first, to be on the lookout. If you start to see signs and symptoms like we saw with my grandmother, we were just like, there's something wrong with grandma. And my
Mhm.
grandma was young. She was a young grandma, and she was very vibrant. If you see in someone else, it's very hard for us to see in ourselves. But if you see in someone they're not coming around as often. They're not engaged as often. Maybe they're grouchy. Maybe they are. It's subtle things. Oh, so-and-so's just being grouchy, and she usually isn't. Um, to talk to them and say, have you had any changes lately? Maybe you need to see the doctor to get a medication change. That's the first thing where I would go if you're seeing a
Mm.
change in someone. A lot of times it's medication related, or it's
Oh.
that maybe a person suffered from a stroke or had a heart condition and they're recovering. You need to be able to give it
Mm.
time, see if there are symptoms there, get that treated,
Mhm.
then they get better. I always also say engage in talk therapy, because it can be jarring for someone, and they may be interacting with their family and friends differently, and the talk therapy can help them through that. It's not long
Mhm.
term for that. It's just it's a reset, really. So I look
Mhm.
at depression as something that, yeah, we could face it, but if we catch it, we can treat it. It's something that is very treatable.
Yeah.
So
Good to
talk
know.
to your friends and your family first. See how they are.
Yeah.
A lot of older people, though, have been uprooted and put into homes or retirement areas, and that's pretty depressing for them to look at what they had and then look at this one room that they're in, and people that they don't know yet. I mean, how do you deal with that?
So I worked in a nursing home in Manhattan for 6 years. And there's something called an adjustment disorder. And kids get this when they go to college. They get it when they go to sleepaway camp. You can get an adjustment, just have an adjustment disorder anytime you have an adjustment. So people think it's only
Yeah.
nursing homes. But it's good things too. It's things we like and get excited for.
Mhm.
And so you
Mhm.
have to really give yourself a few months to be able to say, okay, the person needs to adjust. But most people do. A lot of times people think of a nursing home as something really terrible, like a jail, and it's not. It really isn't. I've said to my kids, I don't want to live with you. I want to go somewhere and live. And it's because they have a lot more people around. There's a lot more to do. My mother in law lived in my house for 10 years, and she's 98 now, and she lives in assisted living facility. She loves it there because we all worked and went to school. What a boring
Yeah.
experience in our house. It was not a fun house. So the
Yeah.
idea that you're surrounded by people and excitement in the home, it's really a fallacy in many cases. A lot of people live in their home, and it's hard to take care of it. It's hard to keep it clean. It's hard to cook for yourself. When you
That's
have
true.
people doing that and they love and care for you, and they really do in nursing homes. You want to check out your nursing home like you would anywhere that you go.
Right.
But
But the
the,
people that work there are just angels on earth,
yeah,
right?
yeah, and assisted living is nice. So I would say that there's a real stigma about living in institutions, and
Hmm.
there need not be. My father-in-law, an example, is that he had a surgery and he came to the rehab unit, and my mother-in-law kept coming in and saying he wants to go home, and he didn't. I worked there, and so I would go visit him, and he'd say, no, 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 I'm good. He's like, it's the first place that everybody's waiting on me hand and foot. And he got to eat all the foods he wasn't allowed to eat at home. And he kind of had a sense of freedom. And
Uh-huh.
he's like, no, no, I'll stay the amount of time, whatever the doctor says. And so a lot of people think that someone is unhappy or that they're, not having a good time, but he felt like he was in a spa because everyone was taking care of
Mm.
him. And he left and he went back home and, after a short stay. But I think that most of us hear from media or other places that institutions are really the last place that we want to go, but it's really not as cut and dry as that.
I
Well,
get that.
let's talk a little bit about it, parents and older their parents and also their children and how we can bring generations together to solve all these challenges that face them.
I always advocate that people try, if they can, for intergenerational. Not everybody lives near each other, but if, I lived with my mother in law for 10 years, and a lot of people said, oh my gosh, how could you do that? It's not hard. That's one thing that people can do. There are also, if you can live near your children, that's another thing. But the other thing that you can do is if you live far apart, you can do regular get togethers on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. It's not always feasible for people to take group vacations. That can be very expensive, but regular Zoom is good. We have relatives in Australia and in other places, and we do as much communication as we can, even with big events, on Zoom. So, what has been seen by many, which is, the whole tech thing as negative, it's really been one of the best connectors of people long distance since COVID that we've found, and
Absolutely.
jump on that bandwagon. It's really been fun.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about your book, The Mentorship Edge, and tell us about the Mentor Project? And
Sure.
also start by defining mentorship.
Okay, sure. So, mentorship is part of generativity. It's where someone is giving their skill, their value, their expertise to someone else without expecting anything in return. And I'll just give you a full definition of it. So, the first thing that is required for the mentor and the mentee both is that there's someone who wants to give something away, right? So, if I said, hey, Cathy, I would love for you to share your expertise in something, and you're like, I don't want to, then you're not mentoring, right? And it's not going to. So, that
Right.
if somebody wants to give something away and you need somebody to want to catch it, because if you said, hey, if Cathy, you said, hey, Mary, I want to give this to you, and Mary was like, I don't want it, then that's not mentoring either. You need a giver and a receiver. It's
Ah,
also intrinsically motivated. And that means that you are not getting paid for it. If you're at work and you're getting paid to mentor, you are not a mentor. You're probably an advisor, you're a coach, or you're something else, but you're not a mentor. And that's because if we feel like we are in need of an extrinsic motivation, like money or any kind of an award or reward, something, then we aren't really doing it without expecting anything in return. And here's the example. I always tell students in my class, I ask them, how many of you would like to volunteer at a soup kitchen? And they all raise their hand. They say, I would. And I say, okay, great. You'd feel really good about that? Or are you doing it because, there's some other reason? I say, no, it would feel great. I've even done it. I loved it. And I say, okay, instead of doing that, go volunteer at Starbucks. And they all say, I would never do that. I'd feel totally taken advantage of. It would be terrible. And so it's that same situation, volunteering in two different situations. But if there's usually an expectation of pay in one, then that's where you get the sort of icky feeling. And so most
yeah.
people in the workplace are not really mentoring because they're expected to mentor for pay. So the third thing is it has to be meaningful connection. I have to like the person I'm mentoring. And if I'm the mentee, I have to actually like the person who's mentoring me. So if it's one of those.
Yeah, because there has to be mutual respect,
Exactly.
especially because you're going to have to respect the advice they're going to give you.
Exactly. So somebody has to want to catch it and do something so if I'm going to mentor somebody and the person's like, I'm good, I'm not actually getting anything out of that. The person that's being mentored has to say, I value that information so much and I want to take it on. That's how I then get to say, I matter. My footprint is being made right now. So both need it. So the next thing is trust. If I'm a mentor and I think that my mentee is going to steal my information and go somewhere with it, That could happen in the workplace. That's not good.
Yeah.
And if the mentee feels like they can't share that they don't know something, be vulnerable in front of somebody, that maybe they'll fire them or they won't give them a promotion. They need that trust in both directions. And
Hmm.
finally, they need to, whenever we have anybody out here doing this, after the trust, we really need to be able to have the whole thing come together, sort of like a recipe where everybody is, all of this is happening together.
Is that what you outline in your book?
I do. I outline all of these in the book. Oh, the last thing is a goal. When you put all these things together, that usually has a goal, and that is
Hmm.
outlined in the book. And I talk about all the different ways in which a person can mentor, from grandmas to astronauts. And
Oh,
it's not always hierarchical. It can be what's called lateral. And this is where everyone is doing this all the time. I saw you two
Oh.
engaged in it, talking, trying to help each other out with sound. So what happens is when a person um, is next to somebody, you look to your left or you look to your right, you're usually going to find somebody who knows something you don't, and they're able to
Hmm.
help. And likewise, you them. So how often have you been somewhere and somebody knew something that you didn't, and they helped you, and that now you know it? Now you're carrying that information. Happens every single day. Like, I'm positive today you have done this, or anyone who's listening, or you will do this. You will help someone, or someone will help you. And they're not your boss, and
mm,
they're not someone above you. And in
Hmm.
the case of Charlie Camarda, who was in space, he's an astronaut. He was on the STS 114 that followed the Columbia disaster. And
oh,
when he was up
Hmm.
in space, he was looking around. He was like, "This is great. It's everything I ever thought it would be." And then he got a call from Mission Control, and they said, "You might have the same problem that the previous mission had." And what can
uh,
you can't like jump out and say, "I'm done. I'm going to open the door and leave." So he
it's true.
Hmm.
called. He didn't call Mission Control and say, "Try to help me with this," because he felt like he didn't trust them at that moment. Like, "Hey, you sent us up here and we have this
Oh.
potential problem." And that would have been a hierarchical thing, right? So he called
Mhm.
somebody that he knew really well, was a really close friend from space, and said, "Hey, I know that you're an engineer and you will understand this. Do I need to call my family and say I'm not coming back? Or is there something we can do to fix this?" And the guy said, "I think I'm going to take a look at it. I'll talk it over with you." He told Charlie everything he thought would be the case. And then he said, "I think you need to do a spacewalk and fix the tile that was the demise of the previous mission. I think you have
Oh,
a loose tile too." So they did a spacewalk and they arrived home safely. Had he not had that advice from that lateral mentor, they would have died. So
ah,
that's
that's
how
powerful.
powerful it is. It's not just swapping recipes. It's not just,
It's
we all
interesting
focus.
because just this morning I had to do an emergency visit to my dentist, right? And I had broken a tooth, but I saved the tooth thinking, and somebody said to me, "Why would you save the tooth? Like, what good is that?" But it turned out that was a crown that I didn't even know it was a crown. And the fact that I brought it back, she was able to cement it back in, my dentist. So I called a couple of people, and one of them was Mary. And I said, be sure when you're getting something repaired in your mouth or anything, bring it with you, the piece that fell out. So I was like actually mentoring someone this morning, saying, be sure you save whatever fell out of your mouth. And it was just funny that you brought that up, because it just strikes me as kind of interesting that I was just doing that without
Yes.
thinking. Of course, you're not thinking about
Right.
mentoring,
Exactly. But
but
there you are making a difference in somebody's life. They now
Yeah.
know that and they hold it. They don't lose that information. That doesn't go away. That gets incorporated into them. How often do you do that? And you just
Yeah.
give that
right.
little 3 steps
Daily,
away.
actually, but you don't know that you're doing it.
Right. And
Yeah.
when you do, you get the same benefit as Ebenezer Scrooge, who, the self-made guy who was a millionaire, lived in a mansion and had servants taking care of his every need, was miserable until he started becoming generative. Every time you're generative, it makes you the new Ebenezer Scrooge, the guy who's so happy with Tiny Tim and everybody else. It really does have that effect. Then you get to say, I made a difference. And you did.
What else makes a good mentor, and why do you think we're built to mentor others of any age?
So we're built to mentor because we all need to feel like we are valuable and needed. We all have that feeling. And we're too busy when we're younger developmentally to even take that in. If I say to a 30-year-old, you will someday feel like giving back to others without expecting anything in return, they're going to be like, you're crazy, because they're not developmentally there. And they're not ready to say, I have value in the world. They're still busy pulling in all the information that they need for themselves. That's their job. They're trying to figure out who they are and what they're doing in the world and what their purpose is. By the time we're in midlife and we have that breathing room, our kids are old enough, we are good enough in our jobs or in our roles in our homes, wherever we are, that's where we have the space and we say, you know what? I like these things about myself, or these are the things that I feel powerful about. That's what I want to pass on to others. We don't really think about it that way. We just start doing it. So it's something that we're built to do, but we just don't think about it. You didn't even think, Cathy, about, oh, I'm going to tell this person this important information that she would need to know about anything that might break in your body. But now that person knows it. And that, what a good thing to have, that information. So you're doing it all the time.
Yeah.
You don't take credit for it.
Yeah. Well, do you think that younger people can mentor older people? Because I've seen a lot of older people go to ashrams or places where they feel that they can get more spiritually tuned to the universe and the environment and themselves. I mean, have you seen that?
I see mentoring as not having an age associated with it. And here's why. If I'm working to understand culture, if I want to work with millennials, to get a millennial perspective. That's not going to be a Gen X or a boomer perspective or the greatest generation perspective. I have to go to that generation. And likewise, the younger generations need to plug into other generations. We all have to do that to get a perspective of whoever it is that we want to target. If we want to target everyone, we need to get everyone's perspective. So yes, spiritual or whatever, it doesn't really have an age. It's really, what do you want to learn? If you're going into advertising and you want to sell things, you better not just rely on your own perspective. You better be looking at the whole age trajectory. And I know that they always say, oh yeah, just go to the younger generation if you want tech support. I don't look at it like that. I look at it like every generation has a perspective because they were born in and raised a certain way and have schooling done a certain way. There's a certain perspective that is really relevant to every, say, decade, and maybe even a little broader than that. So yes, reverse mentoring is strong everywhere, just as strong, but that's part of hierarchical. I don't really differentiate it.
That's great. And also, we know that you lead a nonprofit organization in 3 countries. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's actually more than that. It's like 5. So
5 countries. Oh,
yes. So the Mentor Project came about. Really, it's an act of generativity. So what happened was I was starting to talk to people when I was first saying, hey, I want to learn about what we have to look forward to. And I was talking to people who mentor. I wanted to look at generativity, and I looked at philanthropy, and I thought, well, not everybody can put their name on a building. And even though you could engage in philanthropy, which is rounding up at the grocery store and what you buy, I just that didn't resonate as much with me. Volunteering, we all do it. Everyone does it. But mentoring is the only thing that comes from us, right? A little piece of us goes into somebody else. So I started to talk to all sorts of mentors and people who really enjoyed mentoring. And when I got to one person named Bill Cheswick, he's one of the fathers of the network firewall, which is how we're all safely talking with each other. He said, I'm getting ready to retire the from Bell Labs, and I'm going to live on a farm. I have no access to kids. It's not like I can go to a park and say, hey, kid, you want to learn quantum mechanics? It's not going to work out well. So we were like, okay, let's try to get you
No
into,
kidding.
I know, right? So let's try to get you into some schools. And so we did. And so it was just a couple of us that were getting Bill into some schools. And we were also going into schools and Girl Scouts and like really doing STEM stuff with kids. And someone said, no one will ever want to do that. People who are really high, level individuals, top 1% of their fields are never going to do that. They're busy and they're above that. Well, within 6 months, we went to 60, then to 80, then to 100. And we had to put a total wait list on it. We blew up and everybody came to us. We were not out soliciting this. This was nothing I ever thought of as a company. This was never anything I thought of as becoming as big as it was, but we were really able to prove the theory correct because every day we're getting new people saying, I would like to be a mentor. We have astronauts, we have Nobel laureate nominees, we have astrophysicists, we have artists. We sent one artist to Tanzania, to a village that had never had Western art to learn cartooning. And now, right now in Brooklyn, teaching kids in Brooklyn art. And the goal is to get the two kids from the two areas together. So mentors, what we decided to do was make it a mentor-focused organization so that if a mentor had something they wanted to give back, it wasn't somebody calling in and saying, can somebody mentor? Here's what I'd like. It's saying, here's who we have. Any mentee want what we're giving? So mentees around the world contact us and say, hey, yeah, I'd love what you're giving. Can I connect with this mentor? Can you have this mentor talk to us?
And what's the contact info for that at this point? I know we'll talk about it later.
You can just
Mentor Project.
free. You can click a button that says become a mentee, or you can click the contact button and contact us. But honestly, what we were able to show with the Mentor Project was that people want to give and that no one feels too important to give, and that everyone out there who gives ends up saying, I want to give more than the allotted time that we asked of people. It becomes, we also found that our mentors started mentoring each other that we didn't expect, doing lateral mentoring, starting their own companies, doing all kinds of things, and so that's the Mentor Project. We've given away more than $3 million in 2024 in free mentorship to students around the world.
Gee, that's wonderful. You're really making a difference in the world, and that's accolades and kudos to you. In a way, while you've been talking, I've thought that this Late Boomers podcast that Cathy and I do is a way of mentoring. Not only do we get mentored by the people that we speak to, but we can pass on this to the people who are listening, and it's so very rewarding. So that's another story for you. And I was going to ask you if you have any more examples of how people have made a difference besides, well, even the astronaut story or the story of the artist. How wonderful to hear that. Do you have any more that you'd like to relay to our audience?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, I want to say, yes, you are doing modern mentoring. When mentoring was first defined, they did not have podcasts. And this is modern. You are both modern mentors in doing this. And I do talk about that in the book, the different forms of modern mentoring. But here's another example that we all know of. I'm going to talk about a job example. And this is in the book. There are a lot of examples, but I want to give this because most people use all kinds of stuff and we don't even know how it came about, but we think we might. So there was a guy, Steve, and he was at work. And he was given a task by his boss, like many of us have had, who've gone to the office. The boss comes in and says, I have an impossible task for you to do in an impossibly short amount of time. And so Steve was like, okay, I got it. Now he didn't, but he wasn't going to tell his boss because he wanted to keep his job. So he's like, yeah, I've got it. Don't worry about it. So the boss said, okay. And he comes back a couple days later and he's like, Steve, you haven't made much progress. And Steve's like, I got it. Steve didn't. So that night, Steve calls his friend Steve in a panic. And he says, Steve, I don't know how to do this. I've hit a wall. I need you to help me. And so Steve says, I got you, buddy. I'll come after work and help you. So he comes after work. Everybody's gone. And the two of them start working together. And they're working the night away like Rumpelstiltskin, weaving wheat into gold all night long. And the next day, Steve's boss comes in and he says, Steve, you made so much progress. And Steve said, I told you I had it. And this continues night after night. And the boss is so thrilled. And this job ends up getting finished earlier than the impossibly short deadline. So that Steve was Steve Jobs. And he was working at Atari. And his boss was Al Alcorn, who's known as the grandfather of video games. The work that they were doing was the first video game breakout. And the person that was helping Steve was Steve Wozniak. And so that was an example of lateral mentoring that no one ever thought was lateral mentoring. But that's a pure example of that when you're in trouble, you call the person that you trust and you say, help me. And as a friend, who says, no, give me money? Yeah, we all say, of course I'll help you. So that's one example. Another similar example was I was in college. I was in graduate school, actually, and we were going out on our externship. And if you're a graduate student, you're on your externship and you need to get good, you need good feedback from them. It's part of what you're doing. You need to be able to show that you're good at what you do and that you're going to be a good psychologist when you leave. So I'm on my externship and my fellow student was on hers. And I get a call and we're on cell phones. And this was when cell phones were giant and it cost like $1 million to talk on your phone. So she calls me, it must be important because she's calling me on my cell phone. So I pick it up and she's like, hey, and she's whispering. She's like, hey, I have to do kappas. That's a statistic I don't know. I know you know them because we were just in class and you learned them and you were using them. And I said, okay, I'll walk you through it. And she said, if I don't learn this, I have to do an entire project and I'll be outed that I don't know it. And I don't want to lose my externship or be seen negatively. So I said, okay. So we sat there and I talked her through how to do kappas. She did her project and it worked out great. Now, that is something we all do. Was I unusual in doing that? No. She did that 17 other times for me in other situations. So that little tiny thing of a student calling a fellow student and saying, help me out, I'm in trouble, or I think I am, she may not have been, if I don't get this. But the feeling of helping somebody else, we all get that feeling. Of course I'll help you. Those examples are in the book. There's a bazillion others. Bill, how the network firewall happened wasn't just Bill. It was a whole mentoring example that goes with that. There are all sorts of examples of grandmothers who mentor their grandchildren and carry on the traditions. Thanksgiving every year, I use my grandmother's handwritten recipe cards to make everything exactly the way that she made it. And it came from her mother, most likely. Now, if I leave anything out, everybody's like bummed. If I leave one single item out. Now, my kids will have that recipe. And I didn't know how powerful it was until my uncle came to our house one year and he got to have it. And he had been eating his wife's, family's recipe. So he came and he said, oh, this is my childhood Thanksgiving from beginning to end. And so I shipped him out meal next time so he could have it. But everyone can imagine how it feels when you walk into a tradition that's been held for a long time, for decades, how you just feel right at home. Your whole blood pressure goes down. all of
Yeah.
that. And that's mentoring. So that card that I hold from my grandmother with the recipes is as strong a mentoring as Charlie's was making it home from space safely.
Oh,
So that's all in the book.
That's really, really great. And one more thing I want to ask you. What would you like our audience to have as a takeaway today?
Look to your left and look to your right. You're looking at a mentor.
that's powerful. Very true. I love it.
I
Thank you.
love that.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
I love that.
Deborah. Yeah, I have to really ponder that. Well, I'm looking to you, Cathy, right now, and to you, Deborah.
Okay.
Thank you. Our guest today on Late Boomers has been Deborah Heiser, psychologist, specialist in aging, mentor, author of The Mentor Edge, and founder and CEO of the Mentor Project. If you would like to become a mentor, contact with Deborah at her website, deborahheiser.com. And also, as you mentioned earlier, what is it? mentoredge.org or Mentor Project?
Mentorproject.org.
Mentorproject.org. I like to say that a lot so people can remember it. Mentorproject.org. Thank you.
And tune in next week when we'll be meeting Autumn Karen, who's a filmmaker, ghostwriter, and educator. Please subscribe to our Late Boomers podcast on YouTube and take us along in the car and on walks on your favorite audio platform. Let us know what gets you inspired. We are on Instagram at I am Cathy Worthington and at I am Mary Elkins and at Late Boomers. Please share the Late Boomers podcast info with your friends who may not yet be listening to podcasts and might need a little mentoring, right?
Yeah.
Thanks again, Deborah.
Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be with you both.
Thank you. Great to have you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us on Late Boomers, the podcast that is your guide to creating a third act with style, power, and impact. Please visit our website and get in touch with us at lateboomers.biz. If you would like to listen to or download other episodes of Late Boomers, go to ewnpodcastnetwork.com.
This podcast is also available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and most other major podcast sites. We hope you make use of the wisdom you've gained here and that you enjoy a successful third act with your own style, power, and impact.